That's not the first slide.
Oh, whoops.
Yeah, that's the first. Okay, so then adjust here.
Yeah, you can just either click or press the arrow key or
Okay, I'll go.
whatever.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah. Okay, thank you. So, welcome to Quebec, and we'll be talking about the Canadian novels. Okay, for a bit. So, two props are circulating. There's, as you probably know, Verne wrote 3 Canadian novels, which I edited with my colleague Guillaume Pinson from Laval University in Quebec. He would probably be here, but he's in a sabbatical in France right now, so I'm standing alone. We did, Guillaume and I did Le Pays des Fourrures, Famille Sans Nom, okay, and the third one, Le Volcan d'Or, was done by a friend in France, a searcher in the CNRS, who's Gérard Fabre, who's a specialist of relations between intellectual relations between France and Quebec in the 19th and 20th century. So he did the third one. Guillaume sort of took the lead on Le Pays des Fourrures, and I took the lead on Famille Sans Nom. Okay? And I'll talk a bit about not as much the process of the editing as the content of the novels. So I can start with one quotation, which I'll read in French and translate. Jules Verne is writing to Hetzel Jr., because Hetzel's father has died by now, and he's saying, merci pour les livres sur le Canada que vous m'avez envoyés, c'est parfait, il ne m'en faut pas plus, je suis là dans mon pays de prédilection, le pays de Cooper, et si le public a autant de plaisir à lire ce nouvel ouvrage que j'en ai à le faire, ça ira. Thank you for the books you sent me. It's perfect, I don't need anything else. I'm in my country of predilection, or my favorite country. And then he adds, the country of Cooper. We'll get back to that. And if the public has as much fun reading the novel as writing it, we should be okay. So circulate this man. Okay, so the 3 novels are Le Pays des Fourrures, Famille Sans Nom, Le Volcan d'Or, spread out throughout Verne's career. Forget my notes. So one in 73, same year as Around the World in 80 Days. One in 89, after Hetzel's death. And the other one, 1906, is the first posthumous novel by Jules Verne, Le Volcan d'Or. So, here's my prop. Okay, I gave you a chronology of all the Voyages Extraordinaires. Consider this a checklist, if you may. You can see what you've read, what you haven't read on there. But the way that I've placed it, I find this interesting because the first column you have everything that Verne wrote with Hetzel, okay, and then Hetzel dies, and the second half of his career is Verne working with Hetzel's son, but the power dynamics is completely inverse now. Verne is the leader, and Hetzel's son sort of agrees with whatever Verne proposes. And after that, you have the death of Jules Verne and a series of posthumous novels, which were partly rewritten by his son. I'm going to talk about that briefly. Okay, so it's interesting because if you break it this way, you notice that all the novels that became myths of modernity were written with Hetzel. All the great classics were written early in Verne's career when Hetzel had a lot of authority over him. So I'm going to say something which most Vernians don't agree with. I don't think Hetzel was a bad master for Verne. Okay, I think that the negotiations they went through produced the classics. And once Verne was set free of Hetzel, he became a writer for the happy few and not a writer for the masses. So Hetzel had a very important part in the creation of most of the masterpieces that we know and enjoy. Perhaps if you skim over the 2 columns, you might notice also that the good titles, the catchy titles, are in the first column. And the second column, there are great novels in there, but the titles are not so catchy. You know, there's no journey to the center of the earth there. Or what we were talking about, Edsel was right when he was saying Un billet de loterie is not a very good title. Neither is a number, I don't forget what, and he wanted le billet, he wanted le billet gagnant, okay, the winning ticket. That would have been better, I think, you know. But Verne was already, Edsel was almost dead, and Verne was not listening to him to some extent. Okay, so, yeah, I want to say to start with that Verne spent very little time in Canada. He spent less than 24 hours here at Niagara Falls, and that's it. He spent 8 days in total in North America, which is to say that everything he knows about countries he writes about comes from his reading. And I think he's the most avid reader of the 19th century among writers. He reads everything. Right? Not just literature, not just fiction. He spends his afternoons reading all the French press and periodicals, and he takes notes. He skims over everything. He does it fast, as we were saying earlier. He's not especially reliable, but he's aware of everything that's going on. So what we wanted to do in our editions. So these are the first French scientific, if you will, editions of the French novels. Okay, we wanted to, the first editions with footnotes, if you may, with introduction, etc. And they were published in Paris because we wanted to remind the French that their major writer was interested in Canada. Okay, my pays de prédilection. So that was our mission. And to do it, we went over a part of Verne's readings. Guillaume Pinson is a specialist of the 19th century press. So we had assistants skimming the major newspapers to see what was written about Canada. And we read novels. I'm more into literature. Guillaume is more into the press. Okay, and I read the historians that Verne read, and so we could try to retrace how a writer, with his amount of reading and his capacity for synthesis, could recreate a country sitting in his office in Amiens. Okay, so first thing that I want to say is that for a Frenchman, the first Jules Verne, okay, the Jules Verne until, I don't know when it breaks, probably in the 1870s at some point. I won't say why, we can go into that later, but the first Jules Verne is extremely Anglophilic for a French writer. That's very strange for French readers of his time. Like, all his heroes are American or Scottish or English or Irish or German, but he's not French. The only French characters are Michel Ardan, Passepartout. That's about it. You know, he doesn't create French heroes. So that's very strange. He seems, in the first part of his career, to absolutely love England and the English. I'd say the United Kingdom and all that. He seems to be in love with that. That's going to change. Okay? That's going to change. But for the first part of his career, Phileas Fogg, for instance, is the best-known hero, along with Nemo, I guess, and he's the quintessential British gentleman. Yeah? Okay, before the Canadian novels, there's a forerunner, which is Ned Land from 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. So Ned Land is the great Canadian character in Verne's novels. I don't know if you remember that he's Canadian, but he's Canadian. And not only is he Canadian, he's from Quebec City. Okay? Wow. So he comes from here. And so that's a very strange character, and I want to say a few words about him, because when if you read 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea as a Canadian, you encounter French, Ned Land, and you ask yourself, okay, is he French or is he English? And Verne's answer is he's both. Okay, and so there's two ways to look at the. He speaks French and English indifferently. He's also American. He's everything North American at once. So one way to look at it is that Verne sort of makes a mishmash of all his readings. He doesn't really know what he's talking about, and he's creating this harpooner. There's no whale hunting in Quebec. Verne is strange, you know, but he's creating something weird because he reads too fast and he's misinformed. Or, and that's the interpretation we prefer, he's so enthusiastic about Canada at the end of the 1860s, when Canada just became a confederation. Jules Verne is extremely enthusiastic because he believes that Canada is going to be the country that's going to reconcile the French and the English. That all the wars between the French and English will come to an end in Canada with characters such as Ned Land, who can encompass both historical backgrounds. So that's what he believes when he's writing. We're in 1869, as you know, in 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, and Ned Land is. I won't describe him, but so he speaks French, speaks English. He eats beefsteaks. He's extremely strong. He drinks alcohol. He's the sole character in 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea who reminds us sporadically that we're actually reading an adventure novel, because otherwise it's a purely scientific novel. And what defines him is that he can't bear to be a prisoner of Nemo and of the Nautilus, and he keeps scheming or dreaming of escaping. So Verne makes a sort of a symbolic equation between thirst for liberty and Canada. The Canadian man is a man who strives to be free. Okay, that's his reading in 1869. All I just said sort of disappears in the adaptations. In the film, the 1954 film, Kirk Douglas is not a Quebecer, is not Canadian. The French has completely disappeared. Okay, Le Pays des Fourrures. We're in 1873. Le Pays des Fourrures is a novel that takes place in the North Pole, in the extreme northwest of the continent. Okay, and the characters are British. The characters are not French, except for one, which we encounter briefly and makes a very striking apparition in the novel, who is Coureur des Bois, or as Washington Irving said, Ranger of the Forests. Coureur des Bois, the British characters meet a French hunter, who's extremely, contrary to the British characters, is extremely at ease in the northern setting. He dances, he laughs, he's funny, he controls hunting more than they do, and he's also gentlemanly, so they fight over who killed the fox, and he leaves it to the British because they have a pretty lady with them. Mm-hmm. So this character, that's the only, I'd say, a native Canadian presence in the novel, except for the Inuit that they meet also. But this character, I won't read it. This character stems from the backdrop of this character for them comes from Washington Irving, which is the most. Washington Irving is the most Canadian of American writers, if you will. And Astoria, I don't know if you've read it, I don't know if it's still popular, but Astoria is, he describes his travels in the northwest of the continent, and he describes at length les coureurs des bois, or rangers of the forest, as he describes them, sort of saying that the French, with the Native Americans, are the natural inhabitant of the continent. They're completely at ease in every natural circumstance. Okay, now let's jump ahead to Famille Sans Nom. Okay, we're in 1889 now. Verne has a completely different outlook on several things, including Canada. And so this is a historical romance, which is set during the rebellion of the Patriots. So I don't know if you're aware of this part of our history, but in 1837 or 1838, there was a massive rebellion in what is actually Quebec, and also Ontario, like lower and upper Canada, which was sort of inspired by the no taxation without representation from the South. And it was violently repressed, didn't end well, and didn't end well. There's no happy end to that. And since then, I guess the project of the French Canadians in Canada has been linked more to survival than to establishing something new on the continent. Okay? So Verne is extremely aware of all this. He knows that, and he's, at this point, for different reasons, which I won't get into, but we could talk about it later, he hates the British. He hates the English. And so he writes this historical novel about the events of 37-38, taking the love of liberty that was that of Ned Land and transferring it to the old Canadian nation. Canadian meaning French Canadian, against the British. So it's a historical novel where we're clearly good guys against bad guys, and the good guys are the French, bad guys are the British, not the English, the British. Okay? And so I won't go into a lot of description. It's a mix-up of historical characters and fictional characters. The good guys, the French Canadians, are all coureurs des bois, or rangers of the forest. In that they inhabit the territory in the manner that the native Canadians do, because they're in constant contact with them. And so Jules Verne, in this novel, has ceased to believe that the French and English can come together to create something new. In his new utopia, which is not historically adequate. One of my professors, Marc Angenot, called Jules Verne the last happy utopianist. And he creates utopias out of Canada, different utopias. And this one is that the French and the Native Americans, the Indians, have to come together, will come together, have come together, are coming together to create something radically different, something new that is not British. So Famille Sans Nom is all about that. You have this character here who's a native Canadian, but he's become European. Yeah? So he's called Maître Nick. So he's the great Verne character that's a Native American. An Indian, Maître Nick, but he becomes European. He wants to live like the Frenchmen do. And his assistant, he's a notary, his assistant, him, Lionel Rastigouche, wants to escape the way, the European way of life, to go Indian. Okay, so Verne represents an Indian that wants to go European and a European that wants to go Indian. And what he suggests is that they should meet in the middle and create something that's distinctively North American, something new, something that's not British. And so that's what's going to happen, according to them. Okay, that didn't happen. Like, for instance, in this novel, I won't go into the details, but the first peoples of Canada became the Patriots' ally in the fight for the British in this novel, which was not at all the case in reality. Yeah? Backwards utopias, if you want. Okay, to write this, Verne read quite a lot. So he read hundreds of press and periodical articles, but he also read seriously a few historians, and something remarkable for a Frenchman of his date is that he read Canadian historians, which were not well known at all in Europe. Okay, François Xavier Garneau is a Canadian, the great Canadian historian. Laurent Olivier David also, which was extremely obscure even in Quebec. But he read this in France. So thank you for the books you sent me. These were the books. And this one is a Frenchman. who wrote the history of Canada in 1884. Those are the sources Verne uses mostly, and my footnotes can sort of make the link. But when he was saying to Hetzel that it's my country of predilection, the country of Cooper, what he meant was, well, first of all, he loves Cooper. The real Canadian, according to Verne, is a lot like Hawkeye. So a Canadian a European that decides to go Indian, basically, while the Indians decide to go European and they're going to meet halfway. That's his utopia. He's obsessed with Cooper and the Letterstocking novels. He just loves them. And what did I want to say about this? Yeah, so when he's saying mon pays de prédilection, le pays de Cooper, he does not mean Canada as much as he means the old Great Lake regions, this New York State, the St. Lawrence River Valley, and he's saying that the frontier between Canada and the United States is a strange construct. This is all the same country, and the natives, and later on the coureurs des bois or rangers to the forest know how to inhabit this country, and they should have to lead. So Hawkeye is very important for them, but for every European of his generation. So overall, if I try to be synthetic, you probably know that Jules Verne is one of the only French writers of his date who liked the United States. Actually, he loved the United States. He thought that the future of the Occident depended on the United States because of the Americans' courage and folly and audace, their daring. Okay? So for him, the Americans are extremely brave, courageous, to the extent of folly, and they're also very funny. Okay? He looks at them, he finds them extremely amusing because of there's madness in their courage, but their courage is completely strange. So when he depicts the Americans, usually it's in a funny fashion, sort of like the Gun Club. You know, they can go to the moon, but they're completely crazy. That's his vision of Americans. When he depicts Canadians, after in the second part of his career, he's mostly tragic. Okay? He's not fun. It's not funny anymore. They got a raw deal, and they should have a new way of inhabiting the country that would be more in phase with the Indians or with the Americans. He hates the British. Okay, so that's Maître Nick. He's a notary, and that's his second in command, Lionel Restigouche, who hates being working in an office. He dreams of being free like the natives. Then there's a funny turn of events where I won't go into details, but the notary, Maître Nick, becomes, against his will, becomes the leader of his ancestral tribe. And he has to go live in the forest with the Indians, and his Lionel Restigouche, his assistant, follows him with great enthusiasm, whereas he wants to stay European. Lionel is living the dream. He can go native at last. But Verne wants to create some sort of synthesis between the two. Okay, briefly, there's another novel, The Testament d'un Excentrique, where we encounter a Franco-American character called Maxime. He's one of the participants, and he's from Chicago. Verne shows that he's aware that at the end of the century, actually starting in the middle of the century, a lot of French Canadians had to leave Quebec and go in the United States, become the Canucks there. And because we were so backwards, when it came to industrialization. We lost perhaps 1 million of our population, which was quite significant. If they hadn't left, we might be 12, 15 million today, who knows. Okay? So he's a character of French descent, but from Chicago, because some of them went to Chicago, most of them went to New England, but some of them went to Chicago or the Great Lakes states. Okay, his third and last novel, which is Le Volcan d'Or, is a Klondike novel. Okay, published in 1906, so at the same time as the Jack London novels, but written in 1899. So before Jack London, there was a lot in the press about Klondike, the gold rush, and Verne was inspired. So it takes place in Klondike, and the two characters are two brothers, half brothers, born of no, they're cousins. Okay, they're cousins. They're born of two sisters, one of which married an American, and one of which married an English Canadian. Two French mothers, okay, from Montreal. The one who married an American has a son who is extremely adventurous, who always goes in front of adventure, who wants to go to the gold rush. The one who married an English Canadian has a son who is more of a stay-at-home type, gentleman farmer. He's tamed, and he constantly has to follow his American brother's lead. But at the same time, he's not nuts, unlike his brother, so he's sort of a dialectic between courageous folly and reasonable boring character. The Canadian for them has become a reasonable and boring character, basically, unless he's mixed with the Americans. Okay, there's two versions of Le Volcan d'Or. That's why I spoke in favor of Hetzel earlier on. Now I want to speak in favor, and this is something Vernians are in complete disagreement with. I want to speak in favor of Michel Verne. So the posthumous novels of Jules Verne were partly rewritten, partly or entirely, for some of them, rewritten by his son Michel, okay, who worked with Hetzel Jr. And the manuscripts of Jules Verne were discovered in the late 19th century and were published. So there are two versions of this novel. The version published in 1906 was Michel Verne's version, and the version published at the end of the 20th century was his father's, Jules Verne's version. The two coexist, okay? And the one that Gérard edited is Jules Verne's version, not Michel Verne's version. All respecting respecting Verne scholars, except me, think that that's the only way to go. You have to go with Jules' version. Michel was silly. Jules knew what he was doing. I respectfully disagree with this. I prefer Michel's version. I think Michel, at the end of his career, like Hetzel at the beginning of his career, Michel knew how to tweak his father's writing to make them more lively. Because Jules Verne was a very old man at the end, very old man, and he had become a bit, still talented, but a bit boring. And I think Michel added a lot of life in his novels. La Chasse au Météore, we were talking about, that's an extremely funny novel. We didn't have that kind of energy in Verne for a long time, you know. And another masterpiece, I don't know if you have ever read it, Les Naufragés du Jonathan, which comes later. Verne published that in 1910. That was heavily rewritten by Michel, but this is one of the great unknown masterpieces of Jules Verne. I think that Michel brought fire to his father's writings. Like, for instance, in Le Volcan d'Or, in Jules Verne's version, the two cousins going to Klondike meet two nuns along the way. They become sort of friendly with the nuns. They part ways. In his son's version, they meet two sexy sisters who become love interests. And one of them follows them in drag to the Klondike. There's more life. And there's sexual innuendo, sexual emotion in his son's version. His son was a turbulent adolescent, let's say, but he became a good writer. I think I dream of having a student coming to me saying, "I want to write a PhD about Michel Verne." Okay, go like you did. Like, go one version, the other. Sort of what is exactly is Michel Verne's input? And I think Michel, in spite of what Vernians say, understood his father perfectly. Understood his father perfectly when he was 35, 40, and not only 70 or older. And he did something. He did something quite lively. But that's what I think. Okay, but most Vernians would disagree. It's okay. You can throw your glasses at me. Okay, I just want to end by saying these Canadian novels are, of course, obscure. They were not bestsellers, but still, I think they were extremely influential. They shaped the way France came to see Canada. I believe so, because even the lesser-known Verne novels were extremely influential for a series of reasons we could go into later. Okay, I have a few examples of what I'm talking about. The Lord of the Flies is sort of a hardcore rewriting of the novel Deux ans de vacances. Or Thunderball, the James Bond novel by Ian Fleming. Ian Fleming is extremely influenced by Jules Verne. But the Thunderball is sort of I'll be polite and I'll say a rewriting, but I could say plagiat, how do we say that in English? Of Jules Verne's Face au Drapeau. Okay? So you read both novels, you see it's quite obvious, actually. Okay, so that's it.